Well, good morning again. I feel like I'm so far away from you guys. We should pick this up and just slide it forward. What do you think? Either that or you guys can move forward. And I know that's not going to happen. It is good to be with you this morning. As you can tell, I'm a bit of a easygoing, kind of fun-loving guy. I like to make jokes, so hopefully you'll get a few chuckles as we go through this morning. But one of the things that strikes me about this gospel passage is just how much it reminds me of my own call to ministry and how I approached becoming a local church pastor before becoming a chaplain. And so as we begin this morning, I want to give you some historical and contextual facts about this passage. We know that Jesus is an adult, right? I mean, we heard from a few weeks ago the story of his baptism as an adult at the river and John baptizing him. We know that he has spent some time in the desert and the wilderness being tempted to move away from God and to separate himself from his calling in his life. Just as each of us are in our normal everyday lives, right? I mean, there's temptations all around us. We know that he has decided to begin his ministry near his hometown of Nazareth. And his first item of business while he's there is to proclaim himself as the Messiah, without specifically stating those words. But he preaches in a synagogue on a Sabbath, and in particular, he preaches about a passage from Isaiah. And this is just the intro to his ministry, and he begins his ministry in a really big way. And what all this means is that according to Luke, we are at the very beginning of his very public ministry. And he's in a place where most of us would be most comfortable, right? We go home and when we want comfort and we want to be comforted, where do we go? Home, right? His hometown of Nazareth. And I can imagine him being excited about going back to his hometown to see some of the people that he probably hasn't seen in years, people that he grew up around, to share this great news in his life and what it means for all of humankind. Now, the piece that we heard read for us this morning is just a small part of this story. And it's the response of those around him to what he spoke last week that is interesting to me in this story. And it's how the people thought would welcome him home. Let me start that again. Tongue is twisted around the teeth this morning. I apologize. The interesting part of the story is how the people he thought would welcome him home actually responded in a way that he was not expecting. The people he thought would welcome him home, would love and support him as he began his ministry, and more importantly, as he began his journey towards the cross, just turn on him in a vicious way. And if you think about the stories we've heard of his life, this is kind of a prelude to how the rest of his life is going to go, right? I mean, we know, because we're 2,000 years later, how his life ends in a vicious way. But these are just the beginning of the things that he would endure. So let's take a look at what is really happening in this passage. I wonder, how many of you have ever experienced any form of rejection in your life? Right? I mentioned one of them at the very beginning of our service this morning. I'm bald. I get treated a certain way because I'm bald. It's like people expect to see the sun shining off my head, right? I'm also, and I own this, I'm short, which is why I haven't moved closer to you. I want you all to be able to see me this morning. I own that, okay? But those are all reasons why I have suffered through bullying and rejection throughout my life. And I'm glad that I'm not alone. Maybe we've suffered rejection because we're different. Right? Different than what others think we should be. Like, I'm wearing this collar. People expect me to be a certain way, and I am clearly not that way. But maybe it's rejection that we've experienced in our life from a dream job that we hope to get, that we didn't get. Maybe it was rejection because you were chosen last to play in sports. Whatever it is, most of us, I think, can say that we've experienced someone saying no to us in our lives, right? We've at least been rejected by a someone or a group of someones. What I've learned is that oftentimes that hurt that we feel in that moment, it sticks with us, doesn't it? Some of us take that hurt and carry it for the rest of our lives. Some of us turn it into jokes, right? These are all coping mechanisms. The problem is that the pain is never really easily forgotten. And I can imagine that's the kind of pain that Jesus felt that day, standing before people that he expected to welcome him home with open arms, to accept his calling in life, to be present to him in that moment. And then after hearing that teaching, that powerful words that he spoke, the beautiful words that he spoke right out of the passage from this morning, they turn on him. And they threaten to throw him off of a cliff. And we learn that from this passage that the people seemed to accept him, right? I mean, they thought he was great to have him back. They welcomed him, and they welcomed what he said. They said he spoke beautifully. They were unbelieving, though, that this was Joseph's son, right? The carpenter's son. How could a carpenter's son speak so eloquently? The son of the carpenter was claiming to know God personally, to be saying that God had directed him to say certain things. And I liken it to when I began telling folks that I was going to go into ministry, most of whom looked at me and went, yeah, right. I had a few who said, yeah, that makes sense. And I guess it's important to reveal to you at this point that I used to be a CPA. And so most people looked at me when I said I was going into ministry and said, you're doing what? Some people looked at me and said, please don't, because you're going to lose a lot of money. Yeah. So be it. But for some people, it was hard for them to understand how I worked so hard to be a CPA, and then I was going to change and pivot to become a pastor. To drop everything that I had and knew and go to seminary. This is kind of how I see the people in Nazareth responding to Jesus. These were people who had watched him grow up from being, I'm going to say it, please don't hate me for this, but probably a goofy kid. He had all kinds of things going on in his life. We don't have any of those stories, but I can imagine him as a child experiencing all of these powers that he had, right? Trying to wrap his mind around it. He was different from the rest of the kids, and they knew him as that child. And then he followed in his earthly father's footsteps, becoming a carpenter himself. And now he's standing before people preaching about God's love. And I could hear them in the background going, wait, what did he just say? He can't be saying that. He's just the carpenter's son. And that had to sting for him. I mean, these are the people who watched him grow up, and they loved and supported him, provided him comfort, and they could not believe what he was telling them. And one of the things that Jesus says here really strikes me. He says, truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. It's almost as if he already knows what they're about to do. And he says to them, look, here I am. I'm one of you. I am Joseph's son, but I am also the Messiah. I have come to reconcile all people to God, not just the Israelites, not the Jews, but everyone. And I will do it in a way that there will be no doubt in anyone's mind. I will do things that only God can do. But here's the thing. I won't do it here. Rather, I want you to come to God and reconcile yourself. Spiritually heal yourself of your own accord. I can't do it here because you will still see me as that little kid running around on the streets chasing the other kids who annoyed you, maybe broke your kitchen window playing baseball. whatever other things that he has done in his life. You will not respect me, you will not honor me as you would if you had no idea who I was before I stood before you that day. Yes, I am the Messiah, and I come mostly for the Gentiles so that everyone can know God's love as I know God's love. Now, I know I embellished that story a little bit here, but from my own experiences as a CPA and now as a pastor, those who watched me grow up from a little kid into adulthood, even those who knew me as a CPA and now as a pastor, they could never be my clients as a CPA, and they could also not be my church members as a pastor. Simply put, it is because most of those who watched me grow up as a little kid and into a young adult and into adulthood, all they see me as that chubby little kid that used to run around the street and did break their kitchen window with a baseball. I would have no authority, no power. The things that I would say to them, they would question. And that made both of the jobs that I've done in my life very difficult. You with me on this? So Jesus is basically saying to these people, you are just going to have to take my word for it. I cannot do the things that I have done in the surrounding countryside that you've already heard about because you will not see them from the right frame of mind. He knew that the people of Nazareth would reject him, and I mean wholeheartedly reject him. And they didn't disappoint him either, because they nearly pushed him off a cliff. Think about this, though. Jesus could have easily said, you know what? This is how the people who would have known me the majority of my life are going to treat me. I don't think I could do this because I don't know if I can tolerate or withstand the rejection. And yet, it made me wonder, how many times in our own lives have we felt like we could not carry on because we anticipated something? I am the king of projection. I project every outcome as possible. And I'm happily disappointed when they don't happen. But how often do we do that? Instead of truly listening and following what God is directing us to do. How many of us have ever been so physically rejected that we wanted to give up, to run away, hide under a rock or in a cave somewhere, or whatever ways we can think of to escape pain and rejection? Like I discussed a few moments ago, most of us have experienced this level of rejection in our lives, a time when we wanted to just escape and get away. And believe me, when it comes to folks that you think should be fully supportive of whatever you do or are trying to do, and they end up saying to you, you are not or you never will be, it's painful. And that pain lasts. Doesn't easily fade or diminish. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you that if you do this one thing or that one thing, that pain goes away, that you can forgive or forget what was said. It's just simply not that easy. And often it is fear of feeling that pain again that keeps us from doing things in our lives. And more importantly, it keeps us from taking that next step forward. There are many in our society who have let and continue to let fear of rejection keep them down or hold them back. And as we move towards the future that I think God calls all of us as Christians to be, I want us to remember the words of one of my favorite Westerns, and I don't really like Westerns, but I like this guy. These are the words of John Wayne, who said, "Courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyway." Listen, if we continue to let fear hold us back, how can we ever expect our younger generations to face their fear? How can we have the younger generations learn to know what it means to live boldly? And not only to live boldly, but also to live out the mission that God calls us to in this world. From whom will they learn that rejection is not the end, but rather a door that has been closed only so that God can open a window into the future? And I think that's our duty as Christians in this world. Begin walking the walk of the talk we talk. It's time to stand up for what is right and boldly say that we are no longer going to let people push us towards that cliff and bully us into what is not right. We need to stand up and say that we are not going to let rejection stand in the way of God's plan for us. This story stands as a warning and a call to action. And so I wonder, who among us are going to be bold enough to stand up and say, now is the time?